Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her medical kit for the 100th time that morning as the convoy prepared to move through the dusty roads of Afghanistan's Helmand province. The summer heat was already building, and sweat beaded on her forehead beneath her helmet. Around her, the other soldiers went through their pre-mission routines with practiced efficiency, checking weapons, ammunition, and communication equipment. Maria's routine was different. While others counted bullets, she counted bandages. While they inspected rifle barrels, she verified the seals on 4 bags. Her M4 carbine hung across her chest, but it felt foreign compared to the familiar weight of her aid bag. She had joined the army to save lives, not take them, and that distinction had shaped every day of her military career. The base camp buzzed with controlled chaos as Alpha Company prepared for what should have been a routine patrol. Intelligence reports suggested minimal threat levels in their assigned sector, a series of small villages where American forces had been working to build relationships with local leaders. For Maria, it meant another day of treating minor injuries, checking on villagers who needed medical attention, and maybe dealing with a few cases of heat exhaustion among her fellow soldiers. Captain James Mitchell gathered the squad leaders around a folding table where a detailed map showed their route. Red lines marked known IED locations from previous months, blue circles indicated friendly checkpoints, and green squares showed villages where they planned to stop. The briefing was thorough but routine, covering contingency plans that everyone hoped they would never need to use. "Remember, this is hearts and minds," Captain Mitchell emphasized, his finger tracing their planned route. "We're here to help these people, not intimidate them. Santos, you'll be with 2nd Squad. There's a clinic in the 3rd village that requested medical supplies." Maria nodded, already mentally cataloging the vaccines, antibiotics, and basic medical equipment loaded in her pack. She had spent the previous evening preparing special kits for treating children, knowing that building trust often started with helping the most vulnerable members of a community. Her Spanish had helped her connect with local translators who spoke multiple languages, and she had developed a reputation for being able to calm frightened patients regardless of language barriers. The convoy consisted of 4 armored vehicles, each carrying a mixed group of infantry soldiers, engineers, and support personnel. Maria rode in the 3rd vehicle with 2nd Squad, positioned where she could quickly respond to any medical emergencies across the entire formation. The soldiers around her were a mix of experienced veterans and newer troops, all of whom had learned to respect the quiet confidence of their combat medic. Private First Class Danny Chun, barely 19 and on his first deployment, sat across from Maria checking and rechecking his equipment. She could see the nervous energy in his movements and the way he gripped his rifle a little too tightly. Combat veterans learned to conserve their energy during long missions, but new soldiers often burned themselves out with anxiety before anything actually happened. "First time on this route?" Maria asked Danny, keeping her voice casual and conversational. Danny nodded, not trusting himself to speak without his voice cracking. He had been in country for only 3 weeks, and everything still felt overwhelming. The heat, the dust, the constant awareness that danger could come from any direction at any moment. He had trained for months before deployment, but nothing really prepared someone for the psychological weight of operating in a combat zone. "It's actually pretty peaceful most of the time," Maria continued, adjusting her aid bag to make more room on the bench. "The villagers in this area are generally friendly. We've been working with them for months to improve their access to clean water and basic medical care. You'll probably spend most of the day helping unload supplies and watching me treat scraped knees and upset stomachs." The convoy started moving, and conversation became difficult over the noise of the engines and road surfaces. Maria used the time to mentally review her medical protocols, running through scenarios she might encounter during the mission. Heat injuries were always a concern during summer operations. Dehydration could incapacitate a soldier faster than most people realized, and she carried extra 4 fluids specifically for that purpose. She also thought about the more serious possibilities that every combat medic trained for but hoped never to use. Penetrating trauma from gunshots or explosive devices required a completely different approach than the minor injuries she typically treated during village visits. The difference between saving a life and losing a patient often came down to the first few minutes after an injury occurred, and Maria had practiced those critical procedures until they became automatic responses. The first village appeared through the dust clouds kicked up by the lead vehicles, a collection of mud brick buildings clustered around a central courtyard where children played and women carried water in plastic containers. The convoy slowed, but did not stop, maintaining security while allowing the soldiers to wave at curious onlookers. This was a trust-building exercise as much as a military operation. Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes, the second squad leader, pointed out key terrain features to the newer soldiers as they passed through the village. He had been on dozens of these missions and understood how important it was to maintain situational awareness even during routine operations. The enemy often studied American patrol patterns, looking for predictable behaviors that could be exploited in future attacks. See how the market area gives good lines of sight in all directions? Hayes explained to Danny and the other newer soldiers. That's why we always have someone watching our six when we stop there. And notice how the children react to us. If they suddenly disappear or seem scared, that's usually a sign that something's not right. Maria appreciated Hayes' mentorship of the younger soldiers. Good squad leaders understood that combat effectiveness depended on every team member knowing their role and being prepared for unexpected situations. She had worked with Hayes on several previous missions and trusted his tactical judgment completely. The second village was smaller and more isolated, consisting of perhaps 20 families living in houses scattered across a small valley. The convoy stopped here briefly to deliver school supplies that had been requested by the local teacher, a middle-aged man who spoke excellent English, and served as an informal liaison with American forces. Maria helped unload boxes of pencils, notebooks, and textbooks while maintaining her medical equipment in easy reach. Even during friendly encounters, combat medics stayed prepared for emergencies. A child could fall and need stitches, or an elderly villager might have a medical condition that required immediate attention. The teacher, who introduced himself as Mr. Farid, thanked the soldiers in careful English while children gathered around to examine the new school supplies. Maria noticed several children with minor injuries that could benefit from basic first aid, and she began treating scraped knees and cleaning small cuts while the infantry soldiers maintained security around the convoy. "Doctor lady, my sister is sick," a young boy said in broken English, tugging on Maria's sleeve. She followed him to a nearby house where a teenage girl lay on a mattress, clearly suffering from a high fever and showing signs of dehydration. Maria quickly assessed the situation and began providing treatment, using hand gestures and basic phrases in the local language to communicate with the girl's mother. The fever responded to medication she carried in her aid bag, and she left additional supplies with instructions for continued care. These moments reminded her why she had become a medic in the first place. The convoy continued toward their final destination, a larger village where they planned to spend several hours working with local leaders on infrastructure projects. The road became more challenging, winding through rocky terrain that limited visibility and forced the vehicles to travel in single file. Maria noticed the change in atmosphere among the soldiers around her as they entered terrain that offered more opportunities for enemy ambush. Radio chatter increased as the lead vehicle reported potential obstacles ahead and requested guidance from the mission commander. These communications were routine, but Maria could sense the increased alertness among her fellow soldiers. Everyone understood that the tactical situation could change rapidly, and staying prepared required constant vigilance. The convoy reached the main village without incident, and Maria began preparing for what she expected would be a busy afternoon of medical treatment. The village had no permanent medical facility, and American medics provided the only professional health care available to residents. She had learned to prioritize cases based on medical urgency while also considering the diplomatic value of treating prominent community members. Local leaders greeted the convoy with traditional hospitality, offering tea and expressing gratitude for ongoing American assistance with development projects. Captain Mitchell and his translator began discussions about plans for improving the village's water system, while Maria set up a temporary medical station in the shade of a large tree. Word spread quickly that the American doctor had arrived, and soon a line of patients formed near Maria's improvised clinic. She treated everything from infected cuts to chronic pain conditions, working efficiently while maintaining the friendly demeanor that had made her popular with local populations throughout the region. The afternoon passed peacefully as soldiers and villagers worked together on various projects. Engineers assessed the village's electrical needs while infantry soldiers helped repair a damaged school building. Maria continued treating patients while keeping one eye on her fellow soldiers, monitoring for signs of heat-related injuries or other medical issues. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Captain Mitchell made the decision to begin the return journey to base camp. The mission had accomplished all of its objectives, and intelligence reports continued to indicate minimal threat levels for their return route. The convoy prepared to depart with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized the entire operation. Maria packed her medical equipment while mentally reviewing the cases she had treated during the afternoon. Several patients would need follow-up care that she would coordinate with local healthcare workers, and she had identified a few conditions that required more advanced treatment than she could provide in a village setting. The convoy formed up for the return journey as shadows lengthened across the valley. The mood remained relaxed, but professionally alert as soldiers settled into their vehicles for what everyone expected would be an uneventful trip back to base. Maria reviewed her equipment one final time, ensuring that everything was properly secured and easily accessible if needed. Private Chin seemed more relaxed now, having successfully completed his first village patrol without incident. He had helped with several projects during the afternoon and was beginning to understand how American forces work to build positive relationships with local populations. The experience had given him confidence that would serve him well during future operations. The lead vehicle began moving, and the convoy started its journey home through the same rocky terrain they had navigated earlier in the day. Radio communications remained routine as vehicle commanders reported their status and confirmed that all personnel were accounted for. The setting sun painted the landscape in golden hues that reminded Maria of evening walks she had taken with her family back home in Texas. None of them could have known that their peaceful day was about to transform into something that would test every aspect of their training and challenge everything they thought they knew about the roles they played in their small piece of a much larger conflict. The ambush was already in place, waiting for them in a location that had been carefully chosen for maximum tactical advantage. The enemy had been watching American patrol patterns for weeks, studying the routes used during village visits, and identifying the perfect location for an attack. They had positioned themselves with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes, understanding that success would depend on creating maximum chaos in the shortest possible time. As the convoy approached the ambush site, Maria was reviewing her patient notes from the afternoon and thinking about the medical supplies she would need to request for future village visits. The familiar rhythm of the vehicle moving over rough terrain had become background noise, and even the most experienced soldiers had settled into the routine vigilance of a successful mission drawing to its close. The first indication that something was wrong came from the lead vehicle, whose commander reported an obstacle on the road ahead that had not been there during their morning passage. This was standard procedure for any unexpected change in the tactical environment, but it also served as the signal for the enemy to begin their carefully planned attack. In the space of a few heartbeats, Maria's world transformed from the peaceful conclusion of a successful humanitarian mission into the chaos and violence that would define the rest of her military career. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions, and she felt the vehicle shudder as bullets struck its armored plating. The ambush erupted with the sudden violence that characterized insurgent attacks throughout Afghanistan. Automatic weapons fire poured down from elevated positions on both sides of the narrow valley road, creating a deadly crossfire that trapped the convoy in what military tacticians called a kill zone. The carefully planned attack had been designed to maximize casualties while minimizing the enemy's exposure to return fire. Maria felt the armored vehicle lurch violently as the driver attempted evasive maneuvers within the limited space available on the mountain road. Bullets struck the vehicle's exterior with metallic pings that seemed impossibly loud despite the engine noise and shouting voices inside the passenger compartment. Training took over as soldiers instinctively sought cover and began returning fire through armored windows. "Contact left. Contact right," Sergeant Hayes shouted into his radio, providing the convoy commander with critical information about the direction and intensity of enemy fire. His voice remained calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around them, a testament to years of combat experience and countless hours of training for exactly this type of situation. The vehicle's gunner opened fire with the mounted machine gun, sending streams of tracers towards suspected enemy positions in the rocky outcroppings above the road. The sound was deafening inside the armored compartment, but Maria could still hear radio transmissions from other vehicles reporting casualties and requesting immediate medical assistance. Private Chen pressed himself against the vehicle's floor, overwhelmed by his first experience with combat. The training scenarios he had practiced seemed completely inadequate for the reality of being trapped in a confined space while bullets struck all around him. Maria noticed his panic and placed a steady hand on his shoulder while preparing her medical equipment for what she knew would be a challenging series of casualties. "Stay low and stay calm," she shouted to Chun over the noise of gunfire. "We're going to get through this, but I need you to help me when soldiers get hurt. Can you do that?" Chun nodded frantically, drawing strength from Maria's confident demeanor. He had no way of knowing that her heart was racing just as fast as his, or that she was fighting her own fear while focusing on the medical emergencies she would soon need to address. Combat medics learned early in their careers that projecting calm confidence often meant the difference between life and death for wounded soldiers. The convoy commander's voice crackled over the radio network, coordinating return fire and calling for close air support. Standard ambush response procedures required establishing fire superiority before attempting to evacuate casualties or maneuver out of the kill zone. Every soldier understood their role in this process, but the reality of executing these procedures under intense enemy fire was far more challenging than any training exercise. Maria monitored the radio traffic while preparing her aid bags and checking her weapon. Combat medics carried rifles for self-defense and to contribute to the unit's overall firepower when not treating casualties, but their primary focus remained on saving lives rather than taking them. She could hear wounded soldiers calling for medical assistance from other vehicles in the convoy. "Medic to Vehicle 2. We've got urgent casualties." The transmission came from the lead vehicle, which had taken the brunt of the initial enemy fire. Maria could hear the stress in the voice of whoever was calling for help, and she began mentally preparing for the most challenging medical scenarios she might encounter. The intensity of enemy fire began to decrease slightly as American soldiers established effective return fire positions and began suppressing insurgent fighting positions. This was the critical moment when medical personnel could begin moving between vehicles to treat casualties, but it also required careful coordination to avoid being struck by friendly fire or walking into enemy ambush positions. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the radio with orders for Maria to move to the lead vehicle where multiple casualties required immediate medical attention. The vehicle she was riding in would provide covering fire while she made the dangerous movement between positions. Every soldier understood that exposing themselves to enemy fire was necessary to save the lives of their wounded comrades. Maria checked her equipment one final time and prepared to leave the relative safety of her armored vehicle. Her aid bag contained everything necessary to treat penetrating trauma, severe bleeding, and shock, but success would depend on reaching the casualties quickly and maintaining focus despite ongoing enemy fire. She had trained for this moment throughout her military career. "Chun, you're coming with me," she told the young soldier, who looked terrified at the prospect of leaving their protected position. "I need someone to carry equipment and help with casualties. Stay close to me and do exactly what I tell you to do." The vehicle's rear door opened, and Maria moved quickly across the open ground between vehicles while bullets continued to impact the surrounding terrain. Chen followed closely behind her, carrying additional medical supplies and fighting every instinct that told him to seek cover rather than expose himself to enemy fire. The distance between vehicles was only about 30 meters, but it felt like miles under the circumstances. Maria reached the lead vehicle and immediately assessed the tactical situation inside the passenger compartment. 3 soldiers had been wounded when enemy fire penetrated the vehicle's armor, and their conditions ranged from minor injuries to life-threatening trauma. She quickly prioritized her patients based on medical urgency and began providing treatment to the most seriously wounded soldier. Specialist Marcus Rodriguez had taken a rifle round through his upper chest that had damaged his lung and caused significant internal bleeding. Maria immediately began treating his sucking chest wound while calling for additional medical supplies from Chun. This was exactly the type of injury that required immediate intervention to prevent the patient from going into shock and dying. "Rodriguez, stay with me," Maria commanded as she worked to stabilize his breathing and control his bleeding. "You're going to be fine, but I need you to stay awake and keep talking to me. Tell me about your girlfriend back home." Rodriguez tried to speak, but could only manage weak gasps as Maria worked to treat his wounds. She inserted a chest tube to relieve pressure on his damaged lung, while simultaneously starting in 4 to replace fluids lost due to internal bleeding. These procedures required steady hands and complete concentration despite the ongoing gunfire around them. Chun held medical supplies and followed Maria's instructions while fighting his own terror at seeing seriously wounded soldiers for the first time. Blood covered the interior of the vehicle, and the wounded soldiers' pain was obvious despite their attempts to remain quiet and disciplined. He had never imagined that combat injuries would be so graphic or that medical treatment under fire would be so intense. The second casualty was Corporal Sarah Williams, who had suffered severe lacerations to her arms and face from metal fragments created when enemy bullets struck the vehicle's interior. Her injuries were painful and bloody but not immediately life-threatening, allowing Maria to focus most of her attention on Rodriguez while providing basic first aid to Williams. "Williams, I need you to put pressure on these cuts while I work on Rodriguez," Maria instructed, handing the wounded soldier gauze pads and medical tape. "You're going to be fine, but I need you to help me help you." Williams nodded and began treating her own minor injuries while Maria continued working on Rodriguez's chest wound. The ability of wounded soldiers to assist with their own medical care often made the difference between successful treatment and medical failure when resources were limited and time was critical. The third casualty was Private Johnson, who had been struck by a small piece of shrapnel that caused a deep cut on his leg, but had not hit any major blood vessels or bones. Maria quickly cleaned and bandaged his wound while keeping most of her attention focused on Rodriguez, who remained in critical condition despite her treatment efforts. Radio transmissions continued to provide updates on the tactical situation as American forces worked to establish fire superiority and call in air support. The ambush had been well planned and well executed, but insurgent forces were beginning to withdraw as the intensity of American return fire increased and the risk of being trapped by reinforcements grew. "Air support inbound in 10 minutes, Captain Mitchell announced over the radio network. "Prepare for danger close fire missions and be ready to move casualties to the landing zone as soon as we establish security." Maria knew that helicopter medical evacuation would be necessary to save Rodriguez's life, but first she had to keep him stable until the aircraft could land safely. His breathing remained labored despite her chest tube insertion, and his blood pressure was dropping due to continued internal bleeding that she could not control with field medical procedures. "Chun, I need you to monitor Williams and Johnson while I focus on Rodriguez," Maria directed. "Check their bandages every few minutes and call for me if either of them gets worse. Can you handle that?" Chun nodded and began checking on the 2 less seriously wounded soldiers while Maria continued treating the critical chest wound. He was beginning to understand how combat medics maintain their focus and prioritize their efforts during mass casualty situations. The experience was terrifying, but also inspiring as he watched Maria work with steady hands despite the ongoing danger. Enemy fire continued, but with decreasing intensity as insurgent fighters began withdrawing from their positions before American air support could arrive. The convoy remained trapped in the kill zone until security could be established and casualties could be evacuated, but the immediate threat to life was beginning to diminish. Maria established a second 4-line for Rodriguez and administered medications to support his blood pressure and breathing. His condition remained critical, but her treatment had stabilized him enough to survive until helicopter evacuation could transport him to a field hospital with surgical capabilities. Every minute that passed increased his chances of survival. The sound of approaching helicopters became audible over the gunfire as Army aviation units responded to the convoy's request for medical evacuation and close air support. Attack helicopters would establish security around the landing zone, while medical helicopters extracted the wounded soldiers. This was a complex operation that required precise coordination between ground forces and aviation units. Prep casualties for helicopter evacuation. Captain Mitchell ordered over the radio. Landing zone will be established 200 meters north of the convoy. All units provide security during extraction. Maria began preparing Rodriguez for movement to the helicopter landing zone while continuing to monitor his vital signs and maintain his fluids. Moving a critically wounded patient required careful attention to his breathing tube and chest drainage system, but staying in place was not an option given his need for surgical treatment. Chun and several other soldiers helped prepare a makeshift stretcher for transporting Rodriguez, while Maria gathered her medical equipment and prepared to accompany him during the evacuation flight. Combat medics often flew with critically wounded patients to provide continued treatment during transport to higher levels of medical care. The helicopter landing zone was established in a relatively flat area that provided some protection from potential sniper fire while allowing aircraft to land safely. Infantry soldiers secured the perimeter while engineers checked for improvised explosive devices that insurgents might have planted to target rescue operations. Maria supervised Rodriguez's movement to the landing zone while maintaining pressure on his chest wound and monitoring his breathing. The short journey across rough terrain was difficult for a critically wounded patient, but necessary to reach the medical helicopter that would transport him to a field hospital equipped for surgery. The medical helicopter landed in a cloud of dust and debris while its crew prepared to receive casualties. Army flight medics immediately took over Rodriguez's care while Maria provided a detailed briefing on his injuries and the treatment she had provided. This continuity of care was essential for ensuring that patients received appropriate treatment throughout the evacuation process. Williams and Johnson were also loaded onto the helicopter despite their less serious injuries, ensuring that all wounded soldiers received proper medical evaluation and treatment. The helicopter departed quickly after loading casualties, minimizing its exposure to potential enemy fire while transporting patients to safety. Maria watched the helicopter disappear into the distance while collecting her medical equipment and preparing to rejoin the convoy. Rodriguez's survival would depend on the surgical team at the field hospital, but she had given him the best possible chance by providing rapid and effective treatment at the point of injury. This was what combat medics trained for throughout their careers. The convoy remained in the ambush site while air support units conducted search operations for fleeing insurgents, and engineers checked the route ahead for additional threats. The immediate medical crisis had passed, but Maria knew that the psychological impact of the ambush would affect every soldier who had experienced their first serious combat engagement. Chen approached Maria as she finished packing her medical equipment, his hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline and stress. He had performed well under extreme pressure, helping with casualty treatment and evacuation despite his fear and inexperience. The ambush had transformed him from a nervous recruit into someone who understood the reality of combat operations. "Will Rodriguez be okay?" Chen asked, his voice reflecting genuine concern for his wounded comrade. "He's got a good chance," Maria replied honestly. "The treatment we provided here gave him the best possible opportunity to survive, and the surgical team at the field hospital has everything they need to repair his injuries. Sometimes that's all we can do." The convoy prepared to continue its movement back to base camp as air support units reported that the immediate area had been cleared of enemy forces. The ambush had lasted less than 30 minutes, but it had fundamentally changed the way every soldier in the unit understood their mission and their vulnerability to enemy attack. The convoy's return to base camp took place under dramatically different circumstances than their morning departure. Every soldier maintained heightened alertness as vehicles moved through terrain that now seemed filled with potential threats. The successful ambush had demonstrated that insurgent forces possessed detailed knowledge of American patrol routes and tactics, forcing immediate changes in operational procedures. Maria rode in the lead vehicle now, positioned where she could respond quickly to additional casualties if the convoy encountered secondary attacks. Intelligence reports suggested that insurgents often staged follow-up ambushes designed to target rescue operations and medical evacuation efforts. Her medical equipment remained easily accessible, and she kept her rifle ready for immediate use. The psychological impact of the ambush was visible in the changed behavior of every soldier in the convoy. Chen sat with his weapon at the ready position, constantly scanning for threats through the vehicle's armored windows. His nervous energy from the morning had been replaced by the focused alertness of someone who understood that survival depended on maintaining constant vigilance. Captain Mitchell coordinated with higher headquarters via radio, reporting the ambush results and requesting intelligence updates about potential enemy activity along their remaining route. The successful enemy attack would prompt a comprehensive review of security procedures and patrol patterns designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. All vehicles maintain tactical spacing. Mitchell transmitted to the convoy. Air support will remain on station until we reach base perimeter. Continue monitoring for IED indicators and potential ambush sites. The remainder of their journey passed without additional enemy contact, but the tension remained high until the convoy reached the security of their forward operating base. Guard towers and defensive positions became visible in the distance, representing safety and the opportunity to decompress from their first significant combat engagement. Maria used the final portion of their journey to mentally review the medical treatment she had provided during the ambush. Rodriguez's condition had been critical, but her rapid intervention with chest tube insertion and for fluid replacement had given him the best possible chance for survival. These were the moments that justified years of intensive medical training. The convoy passed through the base's security checkpoints and reached the motor pool where vehicles would be inspected for damage and resupplied for future operations. Maria immediately reported to the aid station to check for updates on Rodriguez's condition and to resupply her medical equipment with items used during the ambush response. News of Rodriguez's condition came through medical channels within an hour of the convoy's return. The field hospital had successfully treated his chest wound, and doctors expected him to make a full recovery after several weeks of rehabilitation. This confirmation provided enormous relief to Maria and every soldier who had participated in his rescue and medical treatment. The unit's leadership conducted immediate after-action reviews designed to capture lessons learned during the ambush and identify improvements for future operations. Maria participated in these discussions, providing detailed accounts of the medical challenges she had encountered and recommendations for enhancing casualty treatment procedures under fire. The chest wound was complicated by continued bleeding that I couldn't control with field procedures, Maria reported to the unit's medical officer. Rodriguez would have died without rapid helicopter evacuation to surgical facilities. We need to ensure that medical evacuation procedures can be executed quickly even during ongoing enemy contact. These after-action reviews were critical for improving unit performance and preventing similar casualties during future operations. Every aspect of the ambush response was analyzed, from initial contact procedures to casualty treatment and evacuation operations. The goal was to identify weaknesses and develop solutions before encountering similar situations. Chen participated in separate debriefing sessions designed specifically for soldiers experiencing their first combat engagement. The psychological impact of seeing wounded comrades and participating in life-or-death medical procedures could be overwhelming for inexperienced personnel, and the unit's leadership understood the importance of providing appropriate support. I thought I was going to freeze up when the shooting started, Chen admitted to the unit's chaplain during his debriefing session. But watching Santos work on Rodriguez helped me understand what I needed to do. She never seemed scared, even when bullets were hitting all around us. The chaplain nodded understandingly, having counseled dozens of soldiers through similar experiences during previous deployments. Combat could reveal unexpected strengths in people, but it could also create lasting psychological challenges that required professional attention. The key was identifying problems early and providing appropriate support. Maria spent the evening writing detailed medical reports and coordinating with field hospital personnel about follow-up care for the wounded soldiers. Williams and Johnson had been treated for their minor injuries, and return to duty, but Rodriguez would require extensive rehabilitation before returning to active operations. The successful medical treatment during the ambush had reinforced Maria's reputation as an exceptionally skilled combat medic, but it had also highlighted the inadequacy of the medic's "don't fight" philosophy that some soldiers still embraced. The reality of modern combat required every soldier to be prepared for both offensive and defensive operations. Word of the ambush spread quickly throughout the base camp, and Maria found herself answering questions from other medical personnel about the treatment procedures she had used under fire. These informal discussions served as valuable training opportunities for medics who had not yet experienced serious combat casualties. The key is maintaining your focus on medical procedures while staying aware of the tactical situation around you, Maria explained to a group of junior medics. You have to trust your infantry soldiers to handle security while you handle casualties, but you also need to be ready to defend yourself and your patients if the situation requires it. The unit's intelligence officer briefed all personnel on preliminary findings about the enemy forces responsible for the ambush. Early indications suggested that the attack had been conducted by experienced insurgent fighters with detailed knowledge of American operational patterns and significant tactical planning capabilities. This was not a random encounter, the intelligence officer explained during the briefing. The enemy chose their ambush site carefully and demonstrated sophisticated understanding of our patrol routes and timing. We can expect similar attacks in the future unless we modify our operational procedures. These intelligence findings had immediate implications for future medical operations in the area. Enemy forces clearly viewed American medical personnel as high-value targets, and Maria would need to modify her procedures for treating patients in forward areas where ambush threats remained high. The following morning brought new mission requirements as the unit prepared for follow-up operations designed to locate and disrupt the insurgent forces responsible for the previous day's ambush. Maria would participate in these operations, but with enhanced security procedures and modified medical protocols based on lessons learned during their first significant combat engagement. Captain Mitchell gathered his leadership team to review operational plans for what would essentially be a manhunt for the insurgent cell responsible for the ambush. These operations would be more dangerous than routine village patrols because they involved deliberately seeking contact with enemy forces rather than avoiding confrontation. Intelligence suggests the enemy cell is operating from a compound approximately 10 kilometers from yesterday's ambush site, Mitchell explained, pointing to aerial photographs that showed a fortified position in mountainous terrain. Our mission is to capture or eliminate the insurgent leadership while gathering intelligence about their operational capabilities. Maria studied the terrain photographs while planning her medical support for the operation. The target area offered limited options for helicopter medical evacuation, and the nature of the mission suggested a high probability of casualties on both sides. She would need to prepare for treating multiple wounded soldiers under challenging tactical conditions. The mission planning process revealed the complexity of modern combat operations and the critical role that medical personnel played in enabling aggressive tactical operations. Commanders could accept higher risks when they knew that wounded soldiers would receive immediate and effective medical treatment, but this placed enormous pressure on combat medics to perform under extreme conditions. Maria spent several hours preparing specialized medical equipment for the upcoming operation, including additional blood products, surgical instruments, and medications for treating severe trauma. She also coordinated with aviation units to ensure that medical evacuation procedures could be executed quickly even in heavily contested terrain. Chen volunteered to accompany Maria during the upcoming operation despite having the option to remain at base camp for additional training. His experience during the previous day's ambush had given him confidence in his ability to assist with combat medical operations, and Maria welcomed his continued support for what promised to be a challenging mission. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Maria asked Chun as they prepared their equipment for the operation. "This is going to be more dangerous than anything we did yesterday, and there's no shame in staying here until you have more experience." Chun shook his head firmly, his determination evident in his voice. "Rodriguez is alive because of what we did yesterday. If there are going to be more wounded soldiers tomorrow, they deserve the same chance he got. I want to be part of that." Maria nodded approvingly, recognizing the transformation that combat experience had produced in the young soldier. Fear was natural and healthy in dangerous situations, but allowing fear to prevent necessary action was unacceptable when lives depended on medical intervention. Chen had demonstrated his ability to function effectively under pressure. The unit conducted final preparations for the upcoming operation as intelligence reports provided additional details about the target area and enemy forces. The insurgent compound included prepared fighting positions and obstacles designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones, suggesting that enemy fighters expected American retaliation for their successful ambush. Maria reviewed casualty evacuation procedures one final time while checking her medical equipment and weapon systems. The upcoming operation would test every aspect of her training and experience, requiring her to provide medical treatment while potentially engaging in direct combat operations against enemy forces. The transformation from routine village patrol to aggressive combat operation reflected the reality of counterinsurgency warfare, where tactical situations could change rapidly, and every soldier needed to be prepared for multiple roles. Maria's experience during the previous day's ambush had demonstrated that the traditional distinction between combat and medical personnel was no longer relevant in modern warfare. As evening approached, Maria joined other unit leaders for final briefings about the upcoming operation. Weather conditions would be favorable for helicopter operations, and air support would be available throughout the mission. Intelligence updates suggested that enemy forces remained in the target area and were preparing defensive positions. The weight of responsibility Maria felt as the unit's primary medical officer was enormous, but it was balanced by confidence in her training and experience. She had proven her ability to save lives under extreme conditions, and tomorrow's operation would provide another opportunity to demonstrate that combat medics were fully capable of fighting alongside their infantry counterparts when circumstances required it. The ambush had transformed every soldier in the unit, but perhaps none more than Maria herself. She had always understood intellectually that combat medics might need to engage enemy forces while providing medical treatment, but the reality of doing so had changed her fundamental understanding of her role in military operations. Tomorrow's mission would test whether the lessons learned during their first significant combat engagement could be applied successfully to more complex tactical scenarios. Maria felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that her ability to save lives and contribute to the unit's combat effectiveness had been proven under the most demanding circumstances possible. The pre-dawn darkness carried an unusual tension as Alpha Company prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. Maria completed her final equipment checks by flashlight, ensuring that every piece of medical gear was properly positioned for rapid access during what everyone expected would be a prolonged firefight. The insurgent compound they were targeting had been reinforced overnight, and reconnaissance reports suggested that enemy fighters were prepared for American retaliation. Captain Mitchell gathered his squad leaders around a detailed terrain model that showed the objective area with remarkable precision. Aerial surveillance had revealed the layout of buildings, defensive positions, and potential escape routes that insurgent fighters might use if the assault succeeded in penetrating their perimeter defenses. Intelligence indicates approximately 15 to 20 enemy fighters occupy this compound, Mitchell explained, using a laser pointer to highlight key terrain features. They've had time to prepare defensive positions and plant improvised explosive devices along likely approach routes. Expect determined resistance and be prepared for significant casualties. Maria studied the terrain model while mentally planning her medical support for the operation. The compound's location in mountainous terrain would make helicopter medical evacuation challenging, and the nature of the assault would likely produce casualties faster than she could treat them individually. She would need to implement mass casualty procedures from the beginning of the operation. Chun sat beside Maria during the briefing, his nervousness from their first patrol completely replaced by focused determination. He had proven his ability to function under fire during the previous day's ambush, and Maria trusted him to provide effective assistance during what would certainly be their most challenging medical scenario. The assault plan required Alpha Company to approach the compound from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing enemy fighters from concentrating their defensive fire against a single American axis of advance. Maria would accompany the main assault force while carrying enough medical supplies to treat multiple casualties without resupply from base camp. Santos, you'll be with 2nd Squad during the initial assault, Captain Mitchell directed. Once we establish a foothold inside the compound, you'll set up a casualty collection point where wounded soldiers can receive treatment before helicopter evacuation. Air support will be available throughout the operation, but expect delays in medical evacuation due to enemy fire. Maria nodded her understanding while making final adjustments to her aid bag configuration. The operation would require her to move rapidly between casualties while potentially engaging enemy forces with her rifle. She had practiced these procedures countless times during training, but tomorrow would test her ability to execute them under actual combat conditions. The helicopter insertion was scheduled for dawn, when limited visibility would provide some concealment for approaching aircraft while still allowing American forces to conduct effective tactical operations. The flight to the objective area would take approximately 20 minutes, giving Maria time to review her medical priorities one final time. Alpha Company boarded their helicopters as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. The flight crews had been briefed on the tactical situation and were prepared to provide close air support during the assault if ground forces encountered heavier resistance than anticipated. Every aspect of the operation had been planned with multiple contingencies. Maria sat with 2nd Squad in the lead helicopter, watching the landscape pass below them as they approached the insurgent compound. The mountainous terrain was beautiful in the early morning light, but it also provided numerous defensive advantages for enemy fighters who knew the area well and had time to prepare their positions. Radio communications remained minimal during the flight to avoid alerting enemy forces to the approaching assault, but Maria could sense the tension among the soldiers around her. Everyone understood that they were deliberately flying into a confrontation with experienced insurgent fighters who had demonstrated their tactical competence during the previous day's successful ambush. The helicopter formation began its approach to the landing zones surrounding the insurgent compound as the sun climbed higher above the mountains. Pilots reported light enemy fire from ground positions, but nothing that prevented them from inserting the assault forces according to the planned timeline. The operation was proceeding as expected. Maria prepared to exit the helicopter as it approached the designated landing zone approximately 500 meters from the target compound. Enemy small arms fire was audible over the noise of helicopter engines, and she could see muzzle flashes from defensive positions that insurgent fighters had established around their fortified position. The helicopters landed simultaneously at multiple locations around the compound, disgorging their passengers quickly before lifting off to avoid prolonged exposure to enemy fire. Maria moved with 2nd Squad toward their assigned assault position while monitoring radio transmissions from other elements of the assault force. Contact front. Heavy resistance from prepared positions. The transmission came from 3rd Squad, which had encountered significant enemy fire while approaching the compound from the eastern direction. Maria could hear automatic weapons fire and explosions that suggested insurgent fighters were employing grenades and possibly improvised explosive devices against advancing American forces. 2nd Squad advanced through rocky terrain that provided some protection from enemy fire while allowing them to observe the main compound building where intelligence reports suggested insurgent leadership was located. The assault was proceeding according to plan despite the intensity of enemy resistance. Medic forward. We've got casualties. The call came from Sergeant Hayes, whose squad had reached the compound's outer perimeter but suffered wounded soldiers during their advance through enemy defensive positions. Maria immediately began moving toward their location while calling for Chun to follow with additional medical supplies. The first casualty was Corporal Davis, who had been struck by rifle fire while attempting to breach a defensive position. The bullet had penetrated his body armor and caused significant internal bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention. Maria began treating his wounds while directing Chun to establish security around their position. Davis, stay with me, Maria commanded as she worked to control his bleeding and establish for access. You're going to be fine, but I need you to keep talking to me. Tell me about your plans when you get home from this deployment. Davis tried to respond, but was going into shock from blood loss. Maria quickly administered medications to support his blood pressure while calling for urgent helicopter medical evacuation. His injuries were beyond what field medical procedures could treat effectively, and delay would likely result in his death. The second casualty was Private Martinez, who had suffered severe burns on his arms and face when an improvised explosive device detonated near his position. Maria began treating his burns while maintaining pressure on Davis's wound, demonstrating the multitasking skills that distinguished experienced combat medics from their less experienced colleagues. Enemy fire continued around the casualty collection point as insurgent fighters attempted to prevent American forces from consolidating their positions around the compound. Maria worked to treat wounded soldiers while occasionally engaging enemy positions with her rifle when their fire threatened her patients or interfered with her medical procedures. "Chun, I need you to take over pressure on Davis's wound while I treat Martinez's burns," Maria directed. "Keep pressure exactly where my hands are now, and call for me immediately if his breathing changes or if the bleeding gets worse." Chin moved into position and began applying pressure to Davis's wound while Maria shifted her attention to Martinez's burn injuries. The coordination between medic and assistant had become automatic after their shared experience during the previous day's ambush, allowing them to function effectively even under extreme pressure. Radio transmissions indicated that other elements of the assault force were making progress toward the main compound building despite continued enemy resistance. The operation was succeeding, but at the cost of multiple casualties that would test Maria's ability to provide effective medical treatment under challenging tactical conditions. "Air support is engaging enemy positions on the north side of the compound," Captain Mitchell reported over the radio network. "Prepare for close air support missions and be ready to mark friendly positions if aircraft request identification." The sound of aircraft engines became audible as close air support arrived to assist with suppressing enemy defensive positions. Maria continued treating casualties while monitoring the tactical situation around her position, knowing that friendly fire incidents could occur when aircraft engaged targets in close proximity to American ground forces. A third casualty arrived at Maria's position when Staff Sergeant Thompson was carried in by 2 soldiers from 1st Squad. Thompson had been wounded by grenade fragments that caused multiple lacerations and possible internal injuries. Maria quickly assessed his condition while continuing to monitor Davis and Martinez. Thompson's injuries are serious, but not immediately life-threatening, Maria determined after her initial assessment. Davis needs helicopter evacuation immediately, and Martinez will need specialized burn treatment within the next few hours. Thompson can wait for follow-up treatment as long as we control his bleeding. The casualty collection point was becoming crowded with wounded soldiers and the personnel required to provide security and assistance. Maria coordinated with squad leaders to establish better defensive positions while maintaining focus on providing medical treatment to soldiers who needed immediate intervention to survive. Enemy resistance began to decrease as American forces penetrated deeper into the compound and captured key defensive positions. Air support missions had effectively suppressed enemy heavy weapons, and infantry assaults were systematically clearing buildings where insurgent fighters had established defensive positions. Compound is secure. Beginning search operations for enemy personnel and intelligence materials, Captain Mitchell announced over the radio. The successful assault had achieved its primary objectives, but casualties would continue to arrive as soldiers discovered improvised explosive devices and booby traps left by fleeing insurgents. Maria requested immediate helicopter medical evacuation for Davis while preparing Martinez and Thompson for transport to higher levels of medical care. The successful completion of the assault meant that aircraft could land safely near the compound without exposure to significant enemy fire. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived within minutes of Maria's request, its crew prepared to accept multiple casualties and transport them to the field hospital. Maria provided detailed briefings to flight medics about each patient's injuries and the treatment she had provided, ensuring continuity of care during transport. Davis regained consciousness briefly during his loading onto the helicopter, his eyes focusing on Maria with recognition and gratitude. She squeezed his hand reassuringly while flight medics completed their preparations for departure, knowing that her rapid treatment had given him an excellent chance for full recovery. "You did good work today, Santos," Captain Mitchell said as the helicopter departed with its load of wounded soldiers. Your medical treatment under fire saved lives and allowed us to complete this mission successfully. The enemy compound has been cleared, and we've captured significant intelligence materials. Maria nodded while beginning to collect her medical equipment and prepare for the return journey to base camp. The operation had tested every aspect of her training and experience, requiring her to provide medical treatment while engaging in direct combat operations against determined enemy forces. Chen helped Maria pack her medical supplies while reflecting on their shared experience during 2 major combat operations in as many days. His transformation from nervous recruit to confident combat soldier had been completed under the most demanding circumstances possible, and Maria felt proud of his performance during both engagements. The return helicopter flight provided an opportunity for Maria to decompress from the intensity of the assault operation while reviewing the medical treatment she had provided. 3 soldiers had been wounded seriously enough to require helicopter evacuation, but her rapid intervention had prevented any deaths during what had been a complex and dangerous operation. News of the operation's success spread quickly throughout the base camp when Alpha Company returned that afternoon. Intelligence materials captured during the assault had provided valuable information about insurgent operations throughout the region, and the elimination of the enemy leadership cell would significantly disrupt their ability to conduct future attacks. Maria received formal recognition for her medical performance during both the ambush response and the assault operation. Her ability to provide life-saving treatment while engaging in combat operations had demonstrated that the traditional distinction between medical and combat personnel was no longer relevant in modern warfare. The wounded soldiers all survived their injuries and eventually returned to duty after appropriate medical treatment and rehabilitation. Rodriguez, Davis, Martinez, and Thompson became lasting testament to the effectiveness of rapid medical intervention provided by skilled combat medics operating under extreme conditions. Maria's experience during these operations fundamentally changed her understanding of her role as a combat medic. She had proven that medical personnel could engage enemy forces effectively while maintaining their primary focus on saving lives, establishing a new standard for combat medical operations in counterinsurgency warfare. The unit's success in both defensive and offensive operations established Alpha Company's reputation as an exceptionally effective combat force, and Maria's medical support had been critical to their ability to accept risks that other units might have avoided. Her willingness to fight when necessary, while never losing sight of her primary mission, had redefined what it meant to be a combat medic in the modern army. Years later, when Maria returned home and eventually became a trainer for new combat medics, she would use her experiences from these 2 days to teach the next generation that their oath to do no harm did not prevent them from doing great good when circumstances demanded both healing and fighting from the same person at the same time.